So today we will be moving on to the next topic in Ayurveda, which is looking at their perspective on the mind. And this is hosted by the Lagras Integral Life Center, which is founded on the Integral Yoga of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. We are a center located outside of Greenville, South Carolina. This is a three-part series that begins today, and today we will focus primarily on the concept of the mind in accordance with Ayurveda and Ayurveda's perspective on mental and emotional well-being, and also give you the chance to determine your own mental and emotional constitution, or manas, Prakruti. Manas meaning mind, and Prakruti meaning inborn or innate nature. So your inborn mental and emotional constitution. Then next Saturday at the same time, May 30th, we are very excited to host Lisa Collins, and she will be speaking specifically to essential oils that can be used to address mental and emotional imbalances as seen in Ayurveda. So it's really a continuation of today's discussion. And Lisa has been working with essential oils for the last 6 years. We have hosted her before on various talks using essential oils. So she's very much an expert and will be, again, tailoring her discussion to address in the same terms as we are today in terms of Manas Prakruti. And then the third and last part will take place in June 20th, and we'll go into very specific lifestyle culprits of mental and emotional imbalances. Ayurveda is very much a preventative science, and so what we want to look at is daily dietary and sleep and activity patterns that can actually help prevent these mental emotional imbalances. And I'll also be introducing a fairly new science in this area called Ayurveda Yoga, in which we will discuss how to integrate Ayurveda with yoga and look at very specific asanas and pranayamas that will help stabilize the mind and the emotions in accordance with your Manas Prakruti. So I'd like to begin with just a brief review of our discussion last time. I would highly recommend, if you have not yet listened to that recording, which is out on our website, that you take a look, because as we will see, your dosha Prakruti very much influences and colors your Manas Prakruti. So we need first to establish your dosha in accordance with Ayurveda, and then from there take a look at your Manas Prakruti. As we discussed last time, the physiological constitution, the body and the various bodily systems in the body is composed of the 5 elements: ether, air, fire, water, and earth. And these 5 elements combine to produce 3 doshas, which you can see on the right side of the chart. So ether and air combine for vata. Fire and water, predominantly fire, but some water, combine for pitta. And water and some, or earth and some water, combine for kapha. So these become our 3 doshas: vata, pitta, and kapha. And last time we took a detailed look at each of these 3 doshas, these 3 physiological constitutions, and you were allowed to kind of go through and determine which one was your dominant one. So if you recall, under vata being primarily ether and air, we looked at the qualities of light, dry, rough, mobile, subtle, clear, and cold, and saw how they manifested in the physical body and how they influence the physiology of the body. The same with pitta, fire and water, light, sharp, hot, liquid, slightly oily and spreading. And kapha, water and mostly earth. So we have the qualities of heavy, dense, hard, dull, cold, liquid, smooth. right? And we went through each of the physical characteristics of these to help you assess what your dominant dosha prakruti is. And these I've just listed down here under each of them. Again, not wanting to necessarily go through each of these again, highly recommend that you listen to the previous recording. But just in general, we can say for Vata, because of the light and mobile and subtle qualities, what we see often is this variability coming across. So it can be a variability in the build. The person is either tall or short. Variability in the appetite. Appetite is very irregular. Same with sleep. Energy levels, as you can see here. So the main aspect and also culprit of Vata is this variability that's being driven by the underlying qualities of ether and air. And so our recommendation last time was really for the Vata person, one of the main things that you can do to stay balanced is to implement a routine in your life, to try to minimize the variability that's naturally happening already within the body. For Pitta, and you can see here on the picture above, Pitta tends to be much more of a medium build, more muscular, more symmetrical, but this fire, this hot and sharp and spreading quality of fire shows itself both in terms of the skin color and temperature, warm, the voice tends to be sharp, very precise use of the words, strong appetite, strong energy level. The Pitta person tends to be very driven and goal-oriented. So here what we said is that oftentimes the main culprit for an imbalance is this overdrive that the Pitta person will go into. It's really mind over matter for the Pitta person. They can push their body until there's literally a meltdown or a burnout. So we suggested that for the Pitta person to try to stay in balance is to take periods of rest, to play, to laugh, not to take life as seriously. And then for the Kapha person, again, mainly water and earth, so we end up getting a larger frame, larger boned person, voice is very soft and calm, heavy sleep. Kapha person loves to sleep, typically will end up taking naps in the afternoon, but they have strong stamina. Once they get going, which takes a little bit in the morning, they are the most consistent and longest in terms of stamina. And they're very patient and easygoing. So here the main culprit for Kapha in terms of imbalances, we said, was really this dull, slow, heavy qualities that can promote or induce a more sedentary life. And so what we want the Kapha person to do is really get out and enjoy life, try new adventures and new things, and really change their routine. They are the best at the routine because they're very consistent. So this again being just a brief overview. If you are listening to this or online, before we go forward, just kind of remind yourself which one of these is going to be your dominant dosha, Vata, Pitta, or Kapha. So now we go into Manas Prakruti, which is again the mental and emotional constitution. And just as we have a unique dosha prakruti, right? Each of us is a certain ratio of Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, but has one of those doshas dominant. We see the same thing with Manas prakruti. As we go forward, we'll see that there are 3 different types of Manas prakruti, and although we all have a mix of the 3, there will be one that's dominant. So the physical and physiological constitution, whether we're Vata, Pitta, or Kapha, this actually influences the mental and emotional self. So if we are Vata versus Pitta versus Kapha, this physical body serves as this container, right? And so it has these underlying qualities of these 5 elements, and it ends up influencing, it ends up coloring our mental and emotional constitution, which sometimes doesn't seem necessarily obvious or logical. But if we think about Vata, right, we just mentioned that Vata has this mobile quality. So in a Vata person, that mobile quality can promote the qualities for Vata, which on the emotional level, mental level, is being able to shift from one idea to the next very quickly, to be able to have a very active mind, to be very flexible, right, and even emotional resilience. In this way, the dosha Prakruti, Vata, Pitta, or Kapha, we will see more of this later, will actually promote or support a particular manas Prakruti. So this interrelatedness between the body and the mind together in Ayurveda determines the psychological nature and the personality traits of the person. And also because of this close interrelatedness, what we see is that the imbalance of either the body or the mind can greatly undermine one's overall health. Or if one or the other or both are in balance, it can support one's overall health. So this is something that we went into detail a little bit last time, with the notion that Ayurveda sees and understands that many of the physical diseases in the body and illnesses in the body actually stem originally or initially with unresolved mental thoughts, emotional feelings that get lodged in various parts of the body. They find those organs and locations that have an affinity with that particular emotion. A couple of the examples that we gave last time was that for the Pitta person, who tends to have more often unresolved anger or frustration out of the various emotions, that if that does not work out and get unresolved, those emotions will get lodged in the digestive system. Primarily, we see the stomach, the liver, the gallbladder, where there is predominantly fire element already in the body. So that emotion gets lodged or crystallized even within that system, and then eventually causes disease and illness. And the same with grief and sadness. The affinity there was with the lungs, and anxiety, stress, fear. There we saw the affinity was with the colon, and so often there will be constipation and gas and the kidneys. And this is really what the mother meant when she said, an illness of the body is often the outer expression and translation of a disorder, a disharmony in the inner being. Unless this inner disorder is healed, the outer cure cannot be total and permanent. So here again, this notion that oftentimes physical illness and disease originates more on the mental or emotional level. Not always, but many times. And so this can be a clue to us, right? If we are having stomach ulcers, if we are having acid indigestion on a regular and consistent basis, then we want to look at our mental and emotional state and see if perhaps there is some anger, some frustration, some envy, jealousy. These are all kind of fiery Pitta type emotions that we haven't resolved. So we always want to kind of take a deeper look for any systemic illness or disease of the body. So as we look at Ayurveda's perspective of the mind, it's important to understand that Ayurveda defines 17 channels, what they call channels or vahasrotas, through which all physical substances and subtle energies flow in the body. And we'll see the mind is just one of these channels. These channels make it fairly unique in that they are not the typical Western medical channels, although some will overlap to a great degree. But we'll see there's a whole separate channel for the mind, which is unlike Western. We have a channel for the prana, for the breath, etc. And each of these channels, the way that they are defined, the way they are understood, the way they are diagnosed, is by three specific aspects. First, each channel has what is called a root. That root meaning really the point of origin of that channel, or the beginning of that particular channel. Mula is simply the Sanskrit word for root. Each channel also has a pathway, a marga, and this pathway defines kind of the channel throughout the physical or energetic body. And each has an opening. Mukha means mouth, so a gate or mouth of the channel. So as we look at the channel of the mind and these three specific aspects, it tells us a lot about how Ayurveda views the mind. The root of the mind is the heart center, which by itself is very, very unusual, right? In Western science, the notion is that the mind, and most of us think of the mind as being in the brain or in the head, whereas here in Ayurveda we have the channel of the mind having its root, its beginnings, its origin in the heart center. So we also know, some of you may be familiar with Heart Math. Heart Math is a company that for now 10 or 15 years has been doing a lot of scientific research in this area about the mind and the heart and their interconnectedness, and they are coming to much of the same conclusion that Ayurveda came to 2,500 years ago, 3,000 years ago. The pathway of the mind is the entire physical and subtle body. So what this means is that the mind is seen to flow throughout the gross and subtle body. And again, not located in any one particular area. And finally, the opening is primarily the sense organs and something referred to in Ayurveda as the marma system. So let us take a look at what this marma system is, because we will be using this system to help balance particular mental and emotional conditions. I'll be recommending to use this system as a means, a remedial means. So marma, marmin, you can see here a Sanskrit word. It means secret quality, hidden meaning, or even murmur, right? And so the marma system is a set of 108 energy points that are hidden just under the surface of the body. And it includes their associated subtle channels that run throughout the body. So as you can see the picture on the left, this is an 108, but it's many of the major marma points that are used in Ayurveda. And it's similar to the concept of Chinese acupuncture points, if you're familiar with those, and the meridian system used in Chinese acupuncture. And in fact, if you compare the marma system in Ayurveda with the acupuncture system in the Chinese traditional medicine, what you'll find is a very close overlap, maybe an 80 or 85% overlap. So these two systems in Ayurveda was actually believed to have been migrated into China and the Far East. And so we do see a lot of parallels and similarities between the two systems. And this marma system becomes very important because it's used for healing in Ayurveda, not only for mental emotional conditions, stability of the mind and the emotions, which we'll look at today, but also healing the physical organs and the various processes in the body. So the channel of the mind, mana vahashrutas, root comes in the heart center, pathway, the entire physical and subtle body, the opening, the sense organs, and the marma system, right? So if we think of the mind as awareness, as consciousness, right, as thoughts and emotions, what Ayurveda is saying is that it includes and encompasses the entire body, originating in the heart, flowing through the entire growth system and the organs and their processes, as well as these very subtle marma points. And this again kind of points us back to this close interrelationship between physical illness and disease and mental and emotional imbalances. So just as we saw in looking at dosha Prakruti, looking at how the physical and physiological constitution is comprised of the 5 elements in different combinations and in different proportions to come up with vata, pitta, and kapha. And we saw that although we each have one predominant dosha, perhaps it's pitta versus vata or kapha, that we have all 3 doshas within us. And this kind of same similarity we find when we look at the manas Prakruti. We look at the composition of the mind and the emotions, which are, of course, much more subtle, much more sensitive, much more refined and lighter, if you will, than the 5 gross elements and the dosha Prakruti. And so in Ayurveda, they see the manas, the mind and the emotions, comprised of 3 gunas. Gunas simply mean qualities, if you will. And these 3 qualities are sattva. So sattva is a Sanskrit word that means wisdom or goodness. But sattva gives the mind and the emotions the qualities of balance, clarity, calmness, harmony, and wisdom. So when the mind is predominantly sattvic in nature, has more sattva than rajas and tamas, then we've got a mind that's in a state of relative peace and calm, clarity, and harmony. Rajas, it has to do with the flow of energy, the flow of consciousness, if you will. The qualities are action, change, movement, adaptability, and desires, right? So it's rajas in us that when we want to do something, when we're driven to accomplish something or have a goal, it's rajas that actually helps us, the mind and the emotions, mobilize around action. And it's also this rajas that creates desires, right? So it's a desire to accomplish a particular goal, to acquire a particular object, etc. So behind rajas gunas is our desires. And then the last one is tamas. Tamas meaning darkness. These qualities are passivity, resistance, inertia, slowness, inaction, and attachment, right? So when the mind is more tamasic, what we'll see is that the mind tends to be slower in thought and emotion, more resistant to change, even dull, if you will. Whereas rajas, we saw that the mind was much more active, more movement of thoughts and emotions, and with sattva, the mind is more calm, in a state of harmony and peace. So all of these 3, right? We have our mental and emotional constitution has all 3, sattva, rajas, and tamas, not just one. One will dominate, but what we really see as we look at these 3 gunas is that the balance really depends on the activity that we're engaged in. If we are going to go into meditation, we would want more sattvic quality, right? We would want sattva to dominate the mind and the emotion. We would want calmness, clearness, balance. If instead we've got a particular project, maybe we've got to clean the house today, right? Or you have a particular goal, then in that case, we really want Rajas to come through. So Rajas is going to get us motivated, kind of move the mind and the emotions into action. And when we do something like sleep, we want the body to dull down. We want the mind and the emotions to really become quiet. Then we want the tamasic guna to come through. So all of these, the dominant one shifts as we go from one activity or one state and another. But again, we each will tend to have one predominant throughout the day and throughout our life. What I should mention is that unlike our physical and physiological constitution, in which in Ayurveda we look at the inborn, the innate constitution at the time of birth, is the person Vata, Pitta, or Kapha, and the objective is to try to keep that dosha in balance throughout the life of the person. And when it goes out of balance, that's when we get illness and disease. And when it comes to the mind and the emotions, the manas Prakruti, although we are certainly born with a particular mix of sattva, rajas, and tamas, we actually, as we grow, as we mature, and as we have more wisdom in life, this mix is going to change. So the objective is not to maintain the mix or manas Prakruti at the time of birth, right? But to gradually evolve and grow into a more sattvic type personality, whether you be Vata, Pitta, or Kapha. And so what we're going to look at next is take each of the dosha Prakrutis, Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. I'm going to mention some of the sattvic qualities when the mind is in a position of balance and harmony and wisdom. What are the characteristics of the mind and the emotions? And then we'll look at how that differs from when the mind and the emotions are more dominated by rajas or tamas. And then for each of them, we'll take a look at some of the marma points that can be used to help rebalance that particular, both that particular dosha, Prakruti, as well as the particular guna here, manas Prakruti. Okay, and so this is why it's important to have some sense ahead of time if you're Vata, Pitta, or Kapha. So let us start with Vata, ether and air. And for the Vata person, when the mind and emotions are more sattvic in nature, what we find is that they're very open-minded. They easily embrace new ideas and experiences. They're very adaptable, flexible, cheerful, lighthearted, right? So you can see these underlying qualities of Vata, right? Underlying qualities of ether and air that's mobile, subtle, clear, light, that is influencing the mental and emotional outlook or personality, if we want to call it. So the cheerful, lighthearted, very adaptable, right? Very mobile. They love their freedom. They love to be able to move around, so they don't necessarily get attached to individuals. And because of this dry quality, oftentimes they'll have this dry sense of humor or a very quick sense of humor. And they tend to be moved by inspiration, tend to be very creative, and they're good at initiating projects, right? So Vata people love movement, love action, love activities. And that's why they're constantly being inspired by new ideas and have lots of creative ideas about problem solving, if you will, and wanting to initiate various projects. So when sattva predominates in a Vata person, what we see is a personality that's cheerful, upbeat. They tend to live in the moment. They have a sense of limitless possibilities, so this expansiveness, right, of ether and air. and they're very social, they're very creative. So of the three, Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, Vata has that personality, that manas Prakruti, that tends to be much more outgoing, much more social, loves conversation. But when there's an imbalance and we get more of a rajasic or tamasic predominance, then what happens, right? So this oftentimes will be excess movement, excess light, mobile, subtle, clear qualities in the physical body, which upsets the sattva and tends from a rajas and tamasic gunas to predominate in the mind and the emotions. And so the mind becomes very active, becomes overactive, very restless, racing thoughts. The Vata person can end up being very self-critical. You know, I think I mentioned last time when, you know, somebody mentions that something's gone wrong, the first thing the Vata person will say is, what did I do wrong? Right? They're very self-critical, unlike we'll see the Pitta and the Kapha person. And they have an issue with being able to concentrate. They become unfocused, scattered, right? So these are qualities of the wind, changeable, unpredictable, indecisive. And the types of emotions that come up are fear, anxiety, and anguish, worry, even emotional insecurity. These are very, very typical mental, emotional states for the Vata person when out of balance. And again, it can be that the physical body is out of balance, that we've got Vata out of balance in the physical, or that the mental, emotional, the gunas of the Vata person is out of balance. They can have a sense of loneliness or isolation. They can get very detached from life. Their humor, instead of being dry or quick, tends to be more self-deprecating humor, kind of coming back to this self-critical nature that can come through. And although they're good at initiating projects, they can have difficulty following through on those projects as well as following through on commitments. Right. So in the end, what we have in the extreme is that life begins to feel turbulent, overwhelming, isolating, and thoughts of the future brings uncertainty, fear, and anxiety. Right? And ultimately, what we see in all three is that mental and emotional depression can set in. Now, for the Vata person, that depression looks very different than it will for the Pitta or the Kapha. As you can tell by some of these descriptives here, the depression most likely to be experienced by the Vata person will be more of like a nervous breakdown, or panic attacks, or an anxiety-ridden depression. Right? These are the types of things that come from the underlying qualities of Vata, and just an inability to shut off the mind. Right? Just lots of racing thoughts, scattered thoughts. So if we come to the marma points, and so today I'm going to focus just on a few marma points for each type as a way to keep them balanced, or to rebalance unbalanced emotions and mental thoughts. Then next week, again, we'll talk about oils and how to use oils, and the third week, other ways, other remedial measures. So today for the marma, there's many, many points here that can be used. You'll see here in the upper left-hand corner, these points that I'm going to mention are for loneliness, fear, anxiety, nervousness, and insomnia. Right? So the typical things that we see when Vata gets imbalanced, and or the gunas of the mind and emotions. So the first one, number 52, so these numbers are the numbers out of 108, and that's why you'll see kind of these numbers that appear random. But number 52 is right in the kind of the center of the chest, where we would normally envision the heart chakra, the anahata chakra, for those familiar with the chakra system. Otherwise, it's really where the fourth rib joins the sternum, and right in the center. Now, Ayurveda believes, regardless of the type of unresolved emotions and thoughts, whether that's stemming from Vata, Pitta, or Kapha, that all of them ultimately get lodged in the heart. So we'll see this is a common point for all three. And the second point, if you go down just a couple inches, 2 to 3 inches, number 53, this point is at the bottom of the sternum. This point is very particular to balancing the winds in the body. Right? So there are 5 vayus or winds in the body, and this particular point will balance the upper 3 winds. And then we have 2 lower ones, number 64 and 65, which is the ascending colon and descending colon. So the colon is a major vata site that is typically the first to get imbalanced. And so what we want to do is activate these 2 points, which you can see is on either side of the pelvic bones. So we have the ascending colon and then the descending. And the way we use these points, there's many ways that you can use marma points, same as I believe in acupuncture. For us, for today, simply being able to locate the point and then putting a light or medium pressure on that point. And you can use any finger. I tend to use my middle finger. You can also think or repeat or say a positive affirmation around the state that you are wanting to maintain in terms of the emotion, whether it's loneliness, fear, or anxiety. Position it as a positive. And the other way, again, we'll see next week with Lisa, that she will show very specific oils that resonate with each of these points, and you can apply those oils. Heat is also often used in Ayurveda, but it's really just as effective by just using some slight or medium pressure. And then if you look at the other side, we have 2 points on the lower back, right? So kind of by the tailbone. And these are points that are associated with the colon again, and also lower back pain. So what we find in Vata people, there tends to be a lot of fears and worries about the future and about their security and stability. And so it'll create lower back pain. It'll get lodged in this lower back pain because of this, the colon being a major vata site. So again, we can just put light pressure on these 2 points. Okay, and then what I'll do at the end here, there may be some questions. I'm unable to actually see the chat box right now, but we will have time at the end here to answer any questions and can go back to any of these slides. So now if we look at Pitta, so remember Pitta, fire and some water. So we've got this sharp, hot liquid, right? And the light, this light is really luminous. It's not light as in Vata and in air, but it's that luminous quality that we see at the tip of a flame. And it's slightly oily because of the fire and water mix and spreading. So sattva, when sattva predominates in the mind and the emotions, we will have a very sharp intellect, very good decision maker, very strong discernment. Pitta person, again, that fire will support mind and emotions that are going to be very goal-oriented and driven. A great ability to concentrate. And they're just very, very focused and determined individuals. So a lot of times right away, without, even kind of going through, are they Pitta, Vata, or noting, the Pitta person will have, the Vata person will tend to have lots of projects. The Pitta person will have a few, but very determined and focused on accomplishing those goals. So you can tell just by the behavior pretty quickly what their physical constitution is. And then you can also tell if their mental and emotional condition is more sattva versus rajasic or tamasic. Very self-reliant, and they have this can-do attitude, so everything is possible for the Pitta person. They have, in terms of friendships, they have what I've put here is understanding and acceptance of others. And what I mean by this is that Pitta people tend to be much more mentally oriented than heart oriented. So their closeness to others and acceptance of others come through understanding the other person's position, understanding their background, etc. It's not just an open compassion and love everyone like we will see with the Kapha person, but they're really coming from more of an understanding and then acceptance of the person. Pitta, Sattva, the excellence and perfection is paramount for these. So again, another trait that you can pick out pretty quickly with a Pitta person that's very sattvic oriented. They're enterprising, adventure oriented, sharp-witted, right? So now they've got sharp being that quality of fire, and clever. Rather than what we saw with the more Vata person of having a quick or dry sense of humor. And they tend to be more visionary and strategic. They have very clear insight, very good forethought. And that forethought or foresight gives them more of a tendency to be strong as a visionary. Whereas we saw in the Vata person, it's more coming from a point of inspiration. And in total, kind of the position of this person when Sattvic predominates, again, great foresight, looking forward all the time, right? So whereas Vata person will live in the moment, we have the Pitta person that's always looking ahead with the goals, with the projects, with this ability of this visionary ability. They're looking forward, looking to tomorrow. They have a sharp intellect, clear discernment, self-reliant, and very optimistic, very positive about what the future holds. When Sattva is not dominant, but rather Rajas and Tamas, then we see some issues starting to happen. And this may not be all the time, right? We have days, we have moments, we have situations where we tend to be more Rajasic and Tamasic. So what we're most concerned with is really if it's persistent. So what we have is that very sharp intellect and that ability for discernment gets used instead as in a way of being critical and overly judgmental, even poor judgment as a result. And this criticalness, right? So remember when the Vata person was asked, or heard that something went wrong, and the Vata person thinks, well, what did I do wrong? Well, the Pitta person, when they hear that something's gone wrong, they wonder, what did you do wrong? Right? So they are critical of others. Now, obviously, I'm exaggerating and making some light fun of these, but be watchful, and you'll see this tendency come up when there's not sufficient sattva in the mind. They also tend to get excess fixated on goals. This excess of goal-oriented, perfection-oriented, excellence-oriented, it gets to be the extreme whenever Rajas or Tamas predominates. And it also spills over into ambition. Instead of just being driven, they have excess ambition, grand ambition, spreading name and fame. This is that spreading quality of Pitta coming through, wanting to spread their name and fame, wanting to be visible. They can become very frustrated and angry. So we saw the Vata person having fear, anxiety, worry. Well, the Pitta person, because again of this hot and sharp qualities, we have frustration and anger. There can be recklessness, destructive tendencies. Humor, instead of being sharp-witted and clever, can be kind of off-color humor. And they can use their mind that's very sharp for scheming, if you will, and even controlling situations. So again, these are extreme. We want to kind of look for variations of these extremes, but often it helps by giving the extreme example so that you can understand sort of softer variations of these. And so in general, when it's out of balance, we get frustration and anger, overly perfectionistic, intolerant, and controlling. Now the Pitta person, so we all can all have and experience depression. Depression for the Pitta person, oftentimes it can be of one or two types. The Pitta person is so much mind over matter that they will refuse or can't even realize that they're in a state of depression. Same thing happens with any illness or disease for the Pitta person. They can, they can be blowing their nose and coughing and running a fever, and they're like, well, I'm not sick, I feel fine. I'm going to go out and do my projects, right? So either they don't recognize the symptoms of the depression because of the mind's control over the body, or they get into sort of this highly frustrated, agitated state. And that can cause them to be impulsive and irritable, right? So it's a very different type of depression. And a lot of times this depression is being caused because the Pitta is so goal-oriented and has ambition and certain desires, right? Very strong desires. If they are unable to accomplish those to their level of perfection, then depression can set in, or unsatisfaction, or frustration, if you will, very minor form. And the Marma points here, again, we come back. The actual Marma points that we're going to look at are for judgment, perfectionism, anger, and jealousy. We start again with the heart. So the go-to point at any time for any mental or emotional imbalance should always be this heart point, this number 52, where the Anahata chakra or the fourth rib joins the sternum. Medium to light pressure. Now you'll see the other three, they're very close together. So 58 is the liver, 59 is the spleen, and 60 is the stomach. These are major areas of fire, of Agni, a part of the digestive system, right? So we talked about anger and frustration. Unresolved will tend to have an affinity for those areas in the body that are fiery in nature, or have a lot of fire element. And this is what the whole digestive system, particularly these 3 points, including the gallbladder, which is part of the liver. And so what you can see here is that, I can't use my mouse, but if you look at 58 liver, right, you can see that it's just under or next to that last rib that you can feel, and you just go in a little bit as it starts to turn up, and there's the point. If you go directly across to the other side and that other rib, you'll have the spleen. So these two are horizontal to each other. You can see one just touching the tip of the liver and the other the spleen. And then right in the middle and up, maybe just half an inch, is the stomach point, the point for the stomach, number 60. So what I would do, these are sensitive points, so you would again do light or medium, and not all three. Always do 1 point at a time, move from one to the next, maybe 15 seconds, maybe 20 seconds before moving on to the next. And then we've also got a stomach point in the hand. So in the palm of the hand, as you can see, number 93, that point. So at the bottom where the thumb just begins to start, and if you just go in an inch, maybe an inch and a quarter, that point becomes the subtle, the Marma point and the energetic system that connects to the stomach. Not all these points are directly over the organs that they represent. Some of them are where you least expect it, like in the back of the knee, on the big toe, because there is this concept of similar to the meridian system, right? There are channels, sensitive channels that energy runs from these different emotions and the different organs. Okay, and lastly, we're going to take a look at Kapha. Kapha and the manas Prakruti being Sattva, Rajas, or Tamas. And Kapha again being heavy, dense, cold, oily, and smooth. And we see when sattva predominates, very different mental, emotional outlook, perspective, personality. Right here, what we'll have is a deep sense of security, unlike the vata person, deep sense of peace. They will be very loyal, right? This is this cloudy, sticky, dense quality coming through in the personality. They will be very loyal to someone. They will have friends from their childhood. And they will have a great deal of conviction around their beliefs and their ideals and their morals. Very stable and grounded, right? Whereas Vata people could become very scattered and unfocused and unable to concentrate. We have the Kapha person, very stable, down to earth, centered, calm. So again, you can see these qualities, right? These qualities of water and earth creating this container in which our mental and emotional perspectives are influenced or colored. Kapha, very compassionate, the water, very generous individuals, very thoughtful, very forgiving. Here, as I mentioned before, long-lasting friendships. The Vata person, Sattva, will have many, very social, many friends, but perhaps not any that are particularly deep or long-lasting. The Pitta person, Sattva, they will have a few friendships, very warm, close friendships, but Pitta person can actually end up having kind of more competitors or enemies than friends because of that fire. And for Kapha, we've got very long-lasting friendships, people who stay in touch with their, childhood friend or the boy next door, boy or girl next door. They are consistent and good with routine. This is the hallmark of the sattvic aspect of Kapha, that they use this heavy, dense, slow qualities to be consistent with routines, something that Vata has some challenges with. And they're good-spirited or jovial, humor, and whereas the Vata person was more inspirational and very creative, and the Pitta person was more of a visionary and being able to see the big picture. For Kapha is very intuitive in that they kind of get a gut sense about something, right? They rely a lot on their inner sense. Again, something we would call gut sense. So when a Kapha person sometimes has to make a decision, they won't necessarily rely on the mind or the heart. They will literally close their eyes and get a sense within, is this the right decision? Is this the right time or not? So very intuitive, very good at this kind of gut sense approach. So when sattva predominates, we get the Kapha person that's very loving, patient, calm and steady, great endurance, and overarching sense of ease and joy in life. Right? And they have this joy in life, in part, I believe, comes from this attitude of gratitude that Kapha people tend to have. They are grateful for maybe not the moment, and grateful maybe not for future possibilities, but they're grateful for the chances that they've had in life to date. They're grateful for the friendships that they've had in the past. They're grateful for their memories, right? So the Vata person we saw kind of lives in the moment. The Pitta person lives for the future, very goal-oriented. And the Kapha person kind of holds these memories of the past that give them this kind of joy in life, or this sense of ease and calm. When out of balance, Rajas and Tamas, there can be, so this kind of sticky, cloudy quality that we see with Kapha, there can be attachments to possessions, attachments to individuals, attachments to relationships, attachments to jobs, attachments to homes. So sometimes these are people that not only have that same friendship that they had when they were 5 with the person next door, but they're still living in their home that they lived in when they were 5. Or moves, they tend to move much less frequently than the Vata person who moves frequently, right, with that air quality. And, you know, instead of this kind of deep loyalty and conviction, they can get kind of clingy and overprotective. Closed-minded, because they can really hold on to an idea, hold on to a conviction, which is the sattvic aspect of kapha. But when it becomes more rajasic and tamasic, they're closed-minded, right? They're not open to other thoughts and ideas. They can become apathetic, unmotivated, this very heavy, dense, slow, hard quality. Living in the past, so instead of being grateful for the memories in the past, they actually live in the past. Resistant to change or procrastinate, right? And this is, you know, when they hear someone say, you know, something went wrong, we had the Vata person that said, what did I do? And the Pitta person that says, what did you do? And what the Kapha person says, well, he doesn't say anything. Kapha person will actually try to avoid the problem and issue altogether, right? So they will procrastinate, they won't address it. It's sort of a standstill, if you will, an acceptance of the current situation and not wanting to really resolve an issue or problem. And they tend to be a crowd pleaser. Now, this crowd pleaser is because Kapha people are very compassionate, loving, caring what other people think of them. But when they can become kind of overly agreeable, right? Rather than sticking to their own beliefs or sticking to their own intuition, they can say or do something because it's going to please somebody else. And be a crowd pleaser. So again, these are extreme situations, but we can see these. We can see, and in fact, all of us can kind of see across the 3 that we have some of these tendencies, but we're looking at the predominant one in different shades of these extremes. So what happens in an extreme situation is that the Kapha person becomes very sedentary in life. They actually start to lack any interest in life, can't seem to find their purpose or the meaning, become overly clingy and attached to people, relationships, things, possessions, and again, living in the past. So as you might imagine for Kapha, a state of depression is going to be much more long-lasting than Vata that kind of moves through things fairly quickly, or Pitta that may be in absolute denial. But for Kapha people, it typically is the longest lasting type of depression. He tends to be accommodated with poor motivation, wanting to sleep long hours, just in general feeling a lack of purpose. So this is one of the most difficult ones. And at some point in this series on Ayurveda, I'd like to go very specifically into different pathologies around, we could do depression, we can do digestion, etc. And we can dive much deeper into these and actually mention some of the Ayurvedic recommendations. For now, I want to just again focus on the Marma points, 3 or 4 of the Marma points. These Marma points shown here are for attachment, greed, possessiveness, depression, and apathy. And you can notice the points are much higher up on the body than the others. These points, we are trying to lift the air, the breath, the energy up in the Kapha person. And if we start with on the face, number 26, you'll see the spot right there between the nostrils and the lips. It's right in the middle. And as we press on this point, you can even do it now as we press on this point with the 3rd finger, or you can even use the 2nd finger. It helps promote a flow of prana upwards, right? So this is what we want to do. The heaviness of the kapha person kind of brings all the prana, all the winds heavy down, emphasizing more the lower breaths and vayus rather than the upper. So this kind of lifts up and activates the higher vayus in the body. A very easy point to do. And then the chin, the center of the chin. Now this is really interesting, number 27. This point is related to the spine. And it is suggested that for those that tend to slouch or lean over and not to have upright posture, that this point be activated frequently. It actually will cause, over time, a more upright posture, if you will. And that upright posture will actually bring some optimism, right, and kind of an ability to move forward in life for the kapha person. So there is both a physical and a mental, emotional connection with this point. The next one down, number 42, is the thyroid, right in the middle of the clavicle bone. This is where we would normally envision the Vishuddha chakra. And this one controls not only the thyroid, but it's also our speech. And as I mentioned, that the kapha person can end up being a crowd pleaser, saying what others expect them to say, rather than their own truth, speaking their own truth sincerely. This will help activate that speech, allow that it's actually a vayu, a wind, upward reaching wind that will kind of connect them with being able to speak their own truth. In Ayurveda, interestingly enough, there is this connection with thyroid and speaking our truth. It is said, or I've been told by my teacher, Dr. Lad, that oftentimes issues with the thyroid, which a lot of women get later in life, are issues with not being able to speak their truth, not feeling like they can speak their truth, whether it be with the spouse or the children or with friends. Right? So this is a situation, again, where the mental or emotional condition can actually be influencing a physical condition. Then we go back down lower to our best, or our favorite heart chakra, 52, our heart point. And then the number 53, the bottom of the sternum, we looked at this point under Vata. Again, this has to do with balancing the air and the winds, the upper. So we're trying to energize the upper part of the body here in the Marmot points, and to give a more forward-looking approach to life. Okay, so that is part one of what we are discussing with Ayurveda's perspective on the mind. I would like to close this talk on the three gunas, on sattva, rajas, and tamas, the subtle gunas, the subtle essences of the mind and the emotions, with a quote from Sri Aurobindo. And this quote, if I could get my next slide to come up, there we go. This quote is Sri Aurobindo speaking about these gunas in spiritual being at a higher level than most of us are used to operating, and certainly on a higher level than what I've been describing in the course of the last hour. What he says about tamas is, he says, tamas in the spiritual being brings a divine calm, which is not inertia, it's not incapacity of action, but a perfect power, shakti, holding in itself all its capacity and capable of controlling and subjecting to the law of calm even the most stupendous and enormous activity. Right? So here the tamas that we saw tends to be more inert and dark and lack of action. Really, in the spiritual being, it's actually used to create this calm that can withstand the most stupendous and enormous activity, right, which is rajas. So we have tamas supporting rajas. And rajas, he says, becomes a self-affecting, initiating, sheer will of the spirit, which is not desire. It's not endeavor. It's not striving passion, right? It's not our ambitions and our goals, but it's the same perfect power of being capable of an infinite calm and blissful action. So even when in action, that action is being done in a calm, blissful way and not striving for a goal or for a desire or for a particular endeavor that we're in. And then lastly, sattva. Sattva becomes not the modified mental light, but the self-existent light of the soul and the perfect power, Shakti, that illumines and unites the divine quietude and the divine will of action. So sattva is more than just understanding, it's more than just knowledge, it's kind of the mental light. It becomes wisdom, it becomes clarity, it becomes harmony, right? And that supports and unites both the divine quietude or calmness that tamas is able to maintain and this divine will of action. So the three come together under the guidance of sattva. This is on the more divine or spiritual level. So next week, May 30th again, we're going to have Lisa Collins talking about essential oils. It's going to be very, very interesting. So please try to join us. She is actually going to be looking at the same emotions that we looked at today and recommending essential oils. So she'll start with vata and some of the rajasic or tamasic emotions and thoughts such as fear and terror, how to reduce those and instead really support the more sattvic vata thoughts and emotions, which is trust, curiosity, attentiveness. She'll do the same with pitta, both the rajasic and tamasic versus sattva, and with kapha. So she's actually going to take some of the same emotions that we have identified here, where there is excess rajas and tamas, how to reduce those gunas and really support the more sattvic spectrum of that emotion. So I thank you very much for joining. I can see here if there are any questions that people might have. Please feel free to unmute and ask if you would, or any comments that you have, anything that you may have noticed in your own life along the nature of what we've been discussing before. We'd welcome certainly any comments or any questions. So Veronica, you seem to be speaking, but you'll have to unmute, or perhaps I can unmute you too.
Okay, thank you so much, Radhe. This was very, very helpful. I live in the Sri Aurobindo Center in Montreal, and I sent you a little message in the chat. I don't know if you saw it or not, but I'd be very grateful to contact you. Can you see me? No.
Yes, I can see you.
Okay.
Absolutely. And but I'll have to, I don't see the chat right now, so I'll have to, and what did you put in the chat, Veronica?
That I would like to contact you by email.
Oh, nice.
I would like a consultation with you. Okay.
Very nice. I will take that. You've been on our other.
Yes. I've been.
Thanks. It's so nice to see you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Perfect.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you. And if there's no other questions, I really again appreciate all of you showing up and being engaged and interested in Ayurveda. And as I continue to show, which is just amazes me, and why I love Ayurveda so much, as well as Jyotish, as well as Vedic astrology, which I do, is that so much of it is very much aligned with the integral yoga of Sri Aurobindo and the mother. So it's really kind of these systems of health and these systems of, you might say, karma or dharma coinciding with the spiritual concepts and philosophy of integral yoga. So it's really, really nice for me to discover these overlaps with the integral yoga philosophy. Okay. Well, I thank you all again very much. Have a lovely weekend, and hopefully we'll see you next Saturday with Lisa.
Thank you.
Thank you.